everyone. It's Amelie Grace here, and I am offering a moment in time where we can come together and look at our lives and reflection with the rest of the universe and the timing of certain cycles. I am feeling the immensity of this moment, of the opening in time that is provided for so much grace for healing, so much movement of grief that's been kind of jammed up in our systems, whether personally, interpersonally, or collectively, culturally, societally. There is a grand trine today, a grand water trine, and it's actually a kite, so it has this opposition that can propel it and spin. It has a lot of grace, it has a lot of momentum as far as us moving forward into our destiny. And when I say that, it's actually very specifically the North Node and South Node playing a role in this grand water trine today, with Mercury going direct as one of the points of the triangle. So I'm going to post a picture so those who need a visual will get to see it, but we have Mercury going direct today, having been 3 weeks in retrograde phase through Sagittarius and the final degrees, the late degrees of Scorpio. So Mercury is turning direct as part of this grand water trine. Very tight trine, 27 degrees Scorpio. And it's the 14th gene key, which is the gene key of alchemical gold. It's in the ring of fire. And so what I feel in this Mercury turning and stationing direct inside of this very strong field of grace with this trine is supporting a deeper uncovering of the buried treasures inside of us. 14 being gold, alchemical gold, the treasures inside of our being. And Scorpio being the depths, right? The depths of the shadow, which is just the unintegrated aspects of ourself. So what might be playing into this this healing, this what I'm calling a glacial melt, and not like global, not like climate change glacial melt. I'm talking like the freeze around trauma, the deep freeze, sometimes deeply ancestral thermal frost that's around our trauma, actually starting to melt with this immense amount of grace that's with us. So part of that is because Mercury turning direct is trine in this grand trine, Chiron, the wounded healer, in Pisces, in the 36th gene key, which moves from the shadow of turbulence, emotional turbulence, to the gift of humanity in the city of compassion, which opens up redemption inside of the dark night. So from November 11th to January 5th, Chiron is going to be in this 36 gene key. It was in that gene key for over a year, but it's now moving on. But it's retrograded back for a little 2-month stint of, okay, let's really get into the deeper roots of our suffering and open up a portal of grace inside of that. So that's part of this trine. The North Node is the other part of this trine, which I'm placing up here because it's sort of the North Star that we're moving towards. It's in Cancer, 27 degrees Cancer. And it's in the 56th gene key. And so the 56 is actually one of the 3 stop codons in the genetic matrix, and it's offering the tests and the trials that we need to actually end a certain cycle of behavioral patterns, whether learned or inherited, that mask us from our true nature and that keep us from reality as it truly is. So there's a major gear shift And, the nodes being aligned in this trine, like I called it a kite, and that's because that south node holds the opposition to the north node and it sextiles the other two points of Chiron and Mercury. And inside of that, there's this momentum, and it's all about unhooking and untethering from our past, but through the digestion of the lessons, and not the like, oh, I got to get away from that, because there's been enough running from. And I think that's part of the medicine of this moment. The 56 gene key particularly says, stop running from that which you're afraid of, that which you don't want to see. And this brings me to this second part of this other aspect that I want to bring in and want to merge it all together. So this new moon in Sagittarius is happening with a very close square, just 2 degrees off, to Neptune and Mars conjunct in Pisces. So Mars has come up into conjunction with the mystic, with the healer, with the one that calls us into our, being in touch with our suffering and opening up the gate of compassion. And coming in, and it's giving us this drive, this Mars, this energy, this drive to really heal, to apply the balm. But first, before we apply the balm, we have to make it. And we have to, it's been sort of like medicine is like constantly around us and through us, and like being concocted and put on, and like there's just so many amazing metaphors inside of that, inside of medicine. And in fact, one of my new favorite astrologers, Ariana Felix, if you haven't heard of her, please check her out. She's at Saltwater Stars. She said in one of her recent blog posts on Mars in in Pisces, she says that we're on the hunt for medicine. You can feel that Mars just focus. I'm on the hunt to find my balm. And so I wanted to just spend a moment here talking about how do we find our balm? How do we concoct our medicine? And the first thing that I think about is our relationship to medicines. And is it a tool for autonomy and a tool for self-initiation and empowered, healing, self-healing, or is it another tool of codependence and distraction? So that 56 of the North Node, that test of distraction, will constantly have you relating to medicine as something outside of yourself and not actually the awakening of your own inner nature. So how do we concoct the medicine? First, we need to stop doing all the things that keep us from being with ourselves. So all the distractions have to pause, and we need to turn within. Very cliche. Turn within. Go within. But in that within, I want to bring in self-inquiry, because Mars and Neptune are in the 63rd gene key that moves from the shadow of doubt to the gift of inquiry and the city of truth. And so this is really about the left and right hemispheres of the brain coming into a conversation where we overcome the logical need to kind of grip on to the knowing and the facts and the logical, and we start to bridge into the deeper intuitions, but really just having a very open mind around life. Intuitive, listening to our intuition is so important in this. And it's not to leave behind logic, it's actually making a bridge between them. And so with this inquiry, this self-inquiry, I feel like is such a part of this making of our medicine. Like, what is your medicine? What do you need right now? And when we get really honest with ourselves and ask ourselves the question, here's a few questions that I'm asking myself. and I'm asking you, am I honoring life through my choices? Am I in integrity with my values, with myself? Am I listening to my intuition? Am I following my gut instincts, or am I overriding them? And I might feel a lot of disappointment if I am not listening. Am I in healthy relationship with myself and with life? And this one comes from Robert Ohado, another one of my really favorite astrologers. He says, am I giving my power over to my victim and to shame in my system? Or am I giving more power to truth and the truth of my worthiness? So who am I empowering? The victim in any moment, or am I empowering the truth of my soul and my inherent worthiness? These are questions that I'm asking myself, and part of what I'm recognizing is that there's this whole thing about, sure, we can ask ourselves the question, but are we willing to receive the answers? And the 63 is all about opening up at the gift level to live the answers. So when I ask these questions and I really want to see myself, and then I go into my life, am I willing to see what life shows me? And it's painful sometimes to be in the face of our mistakes, especially when we have heavy dogma around right and wrong, which is where this Sagittarian energy comes in with this new moon in Sagittarius. So did I already say that? I was like, yeah, I think we've talked about that. The new moon in Sagittarius square. Yes, I think we talked about that. We'll come back to that. So there are layers of honesty. There's like, be okay with the level of honesty that you can be with yourself in certain moments, because honestly, like, I'm peeling back layers, and it's about creating a safe and brave space for myself to show up in self-honesty. And there's layers to that process. Safety for me is about the unconditional part of myself that can witness my flaws and my faults and my mistakes and my shadow with compassion. It's the self-parent that truly it ends the cycle of shame and guilt and can just be with and be in acceptance. Where am I at in that process of being a safe space for myself, to be honest with myself, you know? And then the brave space. This is an amazing twist that I am recently coming into contact with around the anti-racism movement conversation. Is it's about creating brave spaces. Because yeah, we need to be with ourselves, but we also need to have the courage to really penetrate through some of the patterns that have us evading and avoiding and running from and fighting against these unintegrated aspects of ourselves. It's getting really brave to be honest about, how am I continuing to perpetuate my, just my shadow, the pieces of myself that go unattended to and unloved, and therefore they wreak havoc. They spill out sideways through our personalities that, are not so, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like, are not so desirable aspects or whatever. And this is, I think we're entering into pretty deep terrain here. So I just want to say, one of my friends says his mantra, he's a psychotherapist and he works with his clients, he says, compassion first. That is the mantra. No matter what, we have to have compassion first, because it's actually just the most effective way. Like, aside from belief or moral and like right, wrong, if compassion leads, there is an effectiveness that can happen. And that's not to negate anger and the role of anger. And that's actually where I want to go here, is that with Mars conjunct Neptune, that you might find yourself coming into contact with some anger, but also what's the role of anger? And I've gone into this a lot over the last months around the sacred anger and how important it is for us to be outraged around certain things. But when anger is judged and made wrong and then unintegrated, it comes out sideways in all sorts of ways. And this kind of points just to the ancestral level of like unintegrated masculinity that is unhealthy, like the unhealthy dominance that controls life and is actually a harm. It's like the violent harming energy. This definitely reared its head for me, and I started to pay attention to, there's some healing here around the unintegrated masculine, which I'll say again, I love the definition of the patriarchy is not men. The patriarchy is the unintegrated masculine. It's the boy that hasn't grown up into be a true man, which is why we love our men. We just are trying to untether ourselves from the patriarchy, which is the programs of unhealthy masculine. And in the same way, just around when you go into anti-racism work, just because I'm white doesn't mean that I am that. Like, whiteness is a program. It's a cultural program that I am untangling from, and to not get it mixed up with our nature, because we are all truly innocent, beautiful creatures, just having a major learning experience. So being gentle with ourselves. So tracking where either on what end of the spectrum, are you finding yourself seeing the parts of you that have internalized dominance, or that have internalized oppression and victimization and disempowerment? And there's reasons why we get wired into these systems. There are very real systems out in the world, and we're not putting a blind eye to this. When it comes to our personal work, these are the things that are being asked of us. How can we, empower the parts of ourselves just through compassion and through listening? I feel like I'm unpacking something here that has so much more to talk about, and I feel vulnerable going into this because I am just touching on a really big and deep conversation, and right now I'm just I'm not going to go any deeper into it. So if you feel like either triggered or like there's something about what I'm saying that's not making sense, please reach out and we can have a conversation, or start dialogues with your friends around it or whatnot. But what I'm bringing forward is just that this Mars and Neptune is putting us into contact with some of the abuse that we have been a part of, been the receivers of, and been entrenched inside of a world that is traumatized and continues to kind of abuse. And so there is immense unlearning to do in this terrain, so we have to be so kind with ourselves in our process. The last thing that we want to do is use this all against ourselves. So really, I feel like this kind of ties it back to this water trine and the glacial melt, because there is so much to grieve. And that's what I feel like the South Node in Capricorn, holding the tension point of this trine, is showing us about the past, where we have played into these power dynamics, whether just in ourselves or with each other, ancestrally, whatever this is, going to those places and allowing ourselves to feel the grief of the harm and of the hurt. And what do you need? What do you need to be inside of this gear shift and softening, healing, melting process? What do you need to activate and be inside of a healing And really, I just feel like like I trust life so much to always be delivering me the exact experiential and situational means through which I get to unwind my wounding and see myself more clearly. And it's just a matter of whether I'm willing to see that in that moment or not. So, yeah, just inviting however you want to create a space around this new moon in Sagittarius to come into direct contact with yourself. What are you learning right now? You know, Mercury is turning direct. What are the truths that have been revealed to you over the last 3 weeks? Around your power, around your beliefs, around your, shifts in perspective in your life. And asking that question, how does right and wrong get in the way of me learning these lessons? Right, because that's how I started out this, was talking about making the medicine. How do we make our medicine? And I talked about self-inquiry and the layers of honesty and safe and brave space and coming into the feeling and the grief. So bringing this back around to this new moon as well. This is this, how does the Sagittarian kind of shadow of right and wrong and dogma get in the way of me making my medicine? And how can I, in addressing the paradox sometimes of the left and the right and the polarities, slip through into a new dimension of my potential and of my being? Because that's what that 56 up there in the North Node is saying, is like, you can shift, you can make a big shift. The North Node will be in the 56 gene key from October 21st to February 20th. So that's the window where we have this 56. And I think I'll just close here because we're getting a little long. With the new moon is in the 5th gene key and moving from impatience to patience and timelessness. And this just calls in, I feel like, the cycles and the wisdom of the cycles and the seasons and the elements and being in tune with nature, and how incredibly crucial it is for us to stabilize our energies at this time with so much healing and depth and chaos and uncovering, and all of this is just to stay grounded in the earth. I mean, however you can get your feet on the earth and breathe in the energy and this and to open up to the sentience of the earth and its creatures and her creatures and the elements. And in this biofeedback loop, we can really find some new ground. So, wow, here's to your glacial melting, to your thermal frost melting around your wounds, and the integration of some of your worst parts. Like, let your worst parts rear their heads and hold them in love, because they really have so many gifts. I hope this has been helpful for you. I always feel like there's so much more to say, and there always is. This is just my little window, my perspective in this moment. And as I could talk for hours, and I feel like I already have talked too much. So, just wanting to end with a little blessing from our dear one here, Bina Zing. We feel you. I feel you. This is one of my best friends. Even still on the other side, she's my best friend. Trusting in the impermanence of all life and surrendering more deeply into life than we ever have. And give yourself what you need, the support, the container, the self-acceptance, and out of everything, compassion first. Lots of love.